Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. Today is the 11th of January 2019, and this is the first video I'm making in the new year. I have been silent for a very long time because I needed to just spend some time with family over Christmas, and then I had to visit some people, and I've been extremely busy, but also I have been extremely tortured. And what they did over the last couple of weeks, like to many of you, is that they tortured me with body implants, with directed energy weapon attacks, with general terrorism, and by now they have pretty much almost crippled me. So I am really fighting very hard at the moment just to get through my day. And I also know that this is nothing special because many of you are in exactly the same situation that I'm in. And we all know that what we're dealing with is actually a global genocide. And we have seen people die. We suspected them being murdered. Some of us have evidence of our loved ones, or family, friends, or acquaintances having been murdered. And we are all aware how incredibly urgent the entire situation is. Now, looking back over the 2 years, pretty much 2 years now, of the investigation that I've been running for the Joint Investigation Team, and also looking back over the 3 years, pretty much almost to the day, of my targeting beginning and me being assaulted daily with direct energy weapons, I have to say I personally have come very far, but also the entire community and the entire investigation has come extremely far. And by now, I would like to say that even though it doesn't seem like it, even though we're being assaulted with insane brutality, and it's clear that the intelligence agencies and our militaries are trying to mutilate us and kill us, even though all this is happening, I still have to say I'm extremely confident about 2019, and I'm extremely happy about everything that we've achieved over the last 2 years. So I would like to explain to you why I'm so cheerful, and I also would like to explain to you what I propose to do and what the landscape looks like in my view. And I would like to say also that this is my personal view and my personal outlook and my personal plan, and I invite you to join it because I need your help. But at no point do I say that this is the best plan or the only plan that can possibly exist. In fact, what I also say is that you have to join in and add your own creativity and your own investigative force to this entire venture of shutting down the global genocide and arresting the criminals, because none of us can do it alone. So when I say the plan for 2019, it is my plan, okay? But I also would like to put it into the context because for me, 2016, my targeting started January 10th, 2016, and the entirety of 2016 was all about just, being harried. I ran to the High Court. I was trying to find out what is happening. I was trying to fight back. And at the end of 2016, I went public. Now, the entirety of 2016 in my mind was just a blur, really, because I could barely cope with the assaults. I didn't know what was happening, and I was utterly terrified. Now, in 2017 was really when I first got traction under my feet. And you remember that we started first of all, I met Dr. Paul Marco and Mindy Erkin, and I was interviewed by them. Then we launched the Techno Crime Fighters Forum, and then we also started the Joint Investigation Team, and we were really working extremely hard to put all the puzzle pieces together and come up with a cohesive image and come up with something where we could help as many victims as possible. And you remember maybe that in the very beginning of 2017, there was a memo to Donald Trump that was prepared by Ramola Damaraj and that we all signed and sent off. And I strongly believe that that memorandum that she composed really contributed to the entire human trafficking agenda being put on the map. The other thing I also would like to emphasize that in 2017, we had some major breakthroughs. I remind you about the bombshell investigation that Karen Melton Stewart did, which uncovered that Lockheed Martin was running or is running gang stalking in at least 47 of the 50 states. I also remind you of all the absolutely stellar research that Dr. Millicent Black did, for example, and that uncovered a lot. And she really taught me all about, these brain-computer interfaces, really how the entire system of head implants and body implants is interfacing with the computer and how it's being used by trained super soldiers and other people to interface and take over a human being. Now, all these things I didn't know back in 2016, and for me it was an incredibly steep learning curve. So 2017 was for me all about finding out what's happening, devising a map and trying to fight back. So by the time we reached late spring, that's when we started the tsunami email campaign, and the tsunami email campaign informed the officials of half the world. So that was, if you remember, the countries of the world were ordered according to size, and we contacted every country that had more than 1 million inhabitants. And through that process, we got exactly halfway through. And at that point, we had to abort it because the physical assaults on me in Switzerland by Swiss intelligence just became far too brutal. So this is putting it all in context. So by the time we reached the end of 2017, I had already started the affidavit template. I was working on it. I was trying to really, devise things to fight back. I had tried different methods of shielding. I had really tried to cope on my own after my husband and I had separated. And Melanie Richan in Belgium and I were also working on the chip scanning in Belgium. Now, as we fast forward to 2018, and as I ask myself what on earth I have actually been doing throughout 2018, one of the things that really strike me is that 2018 was the year when my life was essentially put on hold. And that's the point when I, as good as, stopped being able to function because of the 24/7 attacks and because of the intensity of the attacks. So if you remember, in spring 2018, I had to flee my home and go into hiding in Hungary, and I was there for weeks and weeks and weeks. And it was really the respite, being with family friends, that allowed me to finish the affidavit template. I have to say, if those family friends hadn't supported me and hadn't essentially fed me and provided a hotel for me with, the extra comfort of having them around, I probably, by the start of 2018, I would have been just finished and would have given up everything. But it was really through those family friends that I managed to pull myself together. I traveled back. I was back in Switzerland, and I was preparing to go in June to the court case of Frederic Laroche when he sacked his lawyer, and then the court case was shifted to the 29th of November. Now, throughout the entire summer, I was polishing off the affidavit template. I was doing a million other things. I was trying to really get going with reaching out to other people and trying to network and find professionals who could help us. And this is how I passed the summer. But I also have to say that by the summer, I don't know how you feel, you victims out there, but by the summer, the attacks on me had become so severe that normal functioning was as good as not possible. So if you remember, I spent night and day inside a metal shed, pretty much on a few cubic meters, working and sleeping in the same confined space as the directed energy weapons, pulsed energy projectiles were drumming against the wall of my shed. So this is just to put it into context for you how far we have come and what an uphill battle it was to do even the simplest things. By the time we reach the end of the year, I have to say, my life had gone up in absolute flames. You remember what happened with the Techno Crime Fighters Forum. after the absolute, breakthrough and amazing time that I spent on the 1st of August meeting Katherine Horton, my personal hero, for the very first time. The next day, the Techno Crime Fighters Forum was broken up. Shortly afterwards, the joint investigation team was pretty much broken up, and I remained on my own. And then later on in October, or I should say rather in September, the chip scanning at the Belgian university turned out to be a complete failure. Now, I still to this day haven't obtained the raw data from that scanning. So by now, I have given up on the university entirely. But nevertheless, despite all these cataclysmic catastrophes in the second half of 2018, and despite the fact that my life had become extremely hard, despite the fact that I was just assaulted night and day, one of the things that I could really see towards the end of 2018 was the community coming together. And I am extremely grateful to, for example, Alexandra in Prague for inviting me to an interview where I could meet Deborah Tavares and Ole Damigard for the very first time. I'm extremely grateful to Richie Allen for allowing me to come back on his show and address his audience. And I'm also extremely grateful to both Ole Damigard and Jim Fetzer, who allowed me to actually talk to them and make contact with them and tell them everything I knew. Also, I should say, I am extremely impressed by the work done by Victorus Libertas and all the videos and the interviews that they are putting together. I have to say, every single time I talk to them, it's a lot of fun and I learn something new every single time. Just because the way that they ask questions. And these are just the people that I spoke to and was trying to, really reach out to their audiences too. But what really struck me was the comments and the questions that I got back after every single one of the interviews. And more people were coming forward, and more people were confirming that they saw, felt, experienced, and suffered exactly the same things that I was describing. And I have to say that in the second half of 2018, this is when really the dam broke, and the type of people who approached me and spoke openly about the assaults and the rape and housebreaking and rapes during the night and mutilation and implanting, it was just on a different scale. And I discovered that all the outreach work that we've been doing, not just we as in, the ladies I worked with and myself, but we as a community of victims, this is now the moment when all this outreach work started paying off. And I can't reveal who my clients are who consulted me, but I can tell you that every single profession and every layer of society is affected by this. So I can tell you that there are, politicians, there are judges, there are lawyers, there are scientists, computer, IT professionals, there are financial advisors, absolutely everybody you can possibly imagine in our society, including doctors, engineers, nurses, and many other occupations I can't remember because there were so many. They are all affected. Okay, so this is how I ended 2018, and even though, because of the frankly traumatic breakup and what ensued with the ladies I used to work with, and despite all these things and despite all the attacks, I have to say I finished 2018 on a high note, and I am extremely confident now going into 2019 because I can now safely and with utter conviction and with all the evidence say that we have now reached critical mass. So one of the things I would like to, I would like you all to know as we launch into this is that in 2019, all of us can go forth in complete self-confidence with our heads held high and just take down this crime cartel, because we are all on one side and every single profession is there to back us up. So what I now see our task to be in 2019 is what I'm outlining here. And it's mostly focused on recapturing the systems and getting the information across to those people who haven't heard about it yet. But I can tell you that throughout 2018, fewer and fewer people questioned what I was saying. Fewer and fewer people spent even half an hour being skeptical. And more people, after just a few minutes of shock, immediately started searching their own mind and said, oh, yes, I've heard about this. Oh, by the way, yes, I know somebody. Now that you mention it, it rings true. Now I actually remember something being said to me, and so on and so on. And very many people came forward and said, actually, the truth is I'm a victim as well. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to announce my personal plan for 2019 in the full knowledge that we have now reached critical mass. We have enough people behind us, even though they are invisible, even though they can't come forward because of their personal situation publicly, they are there to help us. And what we need to do is we need to now take the step and start moving forward and start claiming back the things that we are entitled to, which is the privacy of our home, the complete sovereignty over our bodies, and most importantly, the absolute and unbreakable right not to be raped and violated and gunned in our own homes, or for that matter anywhere on the planet. So this is now really the purpose of the plan for 2019. And before I start, I also would like to make something very, very clear that I indicated in the beginning. You've all probably heard about Q and the Q posts, and very many people are following them. I don't even want to go into what Q does, if it's good or not. Q is definitely there. It's a phenomenon, and what counts is that at least it sets out and it motivates people to do the right thing. Now, the one thing I personally cannot possibly digest is Q's sentence, trust the plan. So when I come up with the plan for 2019, I would like to firmly say that you shouldn't trust any plan. You should improve on it yourself. So with this in mind, I would like to now go forth and outline how I see the entire battlefield ahead of us. And in this presentation, what I would like to say is I would like to clear the main questions. Who in society is doing this to us and other people, meaning the directed energy weapon assaults, the illegal implanting with non-consensual body implants, the remote control torture, the neurotech assaults, and the infection with pathogens, with nanotech, with Morgellons, and all this sort of stuff. Who in society is doing this? Then also, what is the extent of capture of that group? And finally, how to recapture that group. This is what I call the battlefield overview, and I would like to give you my answers about who in society is doing it and all the other questions. I would like to start with the top level command and control. What I'm going to present here is probably not going to be news to any of you. To some of you, it might still seem like just a conspiracy theory, even though conspiracy theory, you all probably know by now, was a term developed by the CIA, right, to humiliate and brush aside any critics of the JFK assassination, right? So even though what I'm presenting here might seem odd to you, I encourage you to read a bit more, because the more you read, the more you will realize that what I'm presenting here is, as far as I can make out, the reality. I haven't seen any evidence that contradicts what I'm presenting here. So with this in mind, the way I see the top level command and control of our society, especially the part that does this to us, consists of several groups or people or institutions, and these are the following. Number one, it's the Vatican. Number two, it's the black nobility. And if you don't know who the black nobility are, I encourage you to read the book by Fritz Springmeier called The 13 Bloodlines of the Illuminati. Now, the black nobility, how to describe them? They are family lineages that acquired stupendous amount of wealth, not least because of their close proximity to the Vatican. These are also families who traditionally, historically, were successful because of an incredible amount of ruthlessness and by just simply killing all their competitors, and in the end ended up acquiring so much wealth and so much power that now, fast forwarding over several centuries, they dominate the world. Who they are in detail doesn't even matter. There are a bunch of families, famous family names. As you go down through the ranks, the family names change a bit. I really refer you to other people to go into the details, but as you will see in this presentation, their precise identities don't even matter. All you need to know is that they do exist, they are hugely powerful, and they're pretty much on top of our world, and they are pulling our strings. And not our strings, everybody's strings, in fact, without sometimes us noticing. Then also, of course, undeniable at the top level are the European royals. It has been rumored that the Queen of England, for example, is the biggest landowner on the planet. Then my personal point would be it has to be precisely distinguished what is owned by the Queen of England and what she's maybe holding, perhaps in a form of trust for the Crown Corporation and the Vatican. But that aside, it is absolutely undeniable that the European royals do wield a lot of power, are connected sometimes by direct family lines to the very top, and through that have to be counted as the top level command and control. Then, of course, the Jesuits, I would really want to put them on the map because they will be important later. What the Jesuits are will be explained in a moment, but in a nutshell, they are and have always been the Vatican's enforcement arm. They are a secret service. They are a network of, unsavory people enforcing the will of the black nobility and the Vatican. The Masons, on the other hand, here really represent the secret societies in general. They are the biggest secret society, as far as I can make out, on the planet, but they are also symbolic for example, the Knights of Malta, the Skull and Bones, and many other groups of people who are, secretive. I also would like to say that the Masons, as far as I can make out, are just a simple front by the Jesuits and the Vatican. They are nothing fundamentally new. They are not a different grouping. They are just the front that these very powerful individuals present to civil society and kind of use it as a recruitment arm. And then finally, of course, the so-called globalists have to be put on the map. These are what's endearingly called high net worth or ultra high net worth individuals. These are billionaires, trillionaires, probably also quadrillionaires, who control the biggest international corporations. So the capitalists, if you like. But what is very, very important is that we now have very detailed information about the control that they're wielding and also how much these corporations in their own right are also contributing to the plight that we are suffering now as victims. Okay, so as far as I can make out, these are the top players. Okay, and you can also clearly see that there's a very strong European emphasis. You might ask, yeah, but what about the Chinese? The quick answer from me, and also the Russians, for example, the quick answer from me is that as far as I can make out, they are entirely in deep capture by this very same network. And the telltale sign is really the communist massacres in Russia and in China, because no power that is striving to become a world power would start massacring its own people, in the millions. When you do that, you are actually in deep capture by a foreign power, even though you might not see it, and even though your so-called leaders might look Chinese, but in actual fact, the puppet masters are elsewhere. So for these reasons, I would actually still like to focus on the Western world, not out of my own myopia or arrogance, but simply because as a systems analyst, I think these are still the main players at this moment in time. So these are the people who are relevant to us, and these are the people ultimately who created this genocide. Okay. Now, if you ask, how are these people involved in detail? I would say, roughly speaking, as follows. The Vatican, apart from, as I would say, being in charge of worldwide brainwash through religion, although that might be a very hotly debated point by Christians. What you might, what you think or don't think about religion doesn't even matter, but what's an undeniable fact is that alongside religion and what I would call propaganda and brainwash, the Vatican is also the owner of the Vatican Bank. And this is, I think, still the most powerful financial structure underpinning our world to this day. Even though you might think the Vatican Bank is a small thing, its tentacles are not small, but reach into absolutely everything and even into the smallest communities. So this is why the Vatican has to be put on the map, because that's also where a lot of the money lies. Now, the other thing that has to be noted is that whistleblowers have been reporting sacrifice rituals in the Vatican. There are several survivors and several people who have come back and have reported that they have been flown to Rome, they have been taken to the Vatican, and they have witnessed and taken and were forced to take part in human sacrifice rituals happening in the catacombs under the Vatican, so under St. Peter's Basilica. Okay, so this invariably involved the murder of a small child, a baby, a toddler, and sometimes even a person. So for these reasons, there's something extremely highly criminal happening, and these human sacrifice rituals run like a trail through the entire upper echelons of this command and control structure. And also they are responsible for the human trafficking, the incredible brutality, the child abuse and the pedophilia we see in our societies, especially at the highest levels of society. Now, the black nobility is, as I said, these ruling families, some might call them the ruling mafia families, but through their influence, these people are involved in absolutely everything that all the other groups presented here are involved in. And I would also say that they are the ultimate command and control. So if we turn to the royals now, they are, I would say, the public royals that we can see, whereas the black nobility is more hidden. It's, they are also their own type of royal families, but they are not, parading in public. As far as the public royals are concerned, we already heard reports about the royal families expecting a great culling. There's, for example, the testimony by Dr. Rima Leibov about a conversation she had with the head of state, who, she later on describes as, or circumscribes rather, as being, European royalty sitting on a throne. And this was the person who said to her, "Oh, it's almost time for the great culling, isn't it?" Now, this video where Dr. Rima Leibov reports this conversation she had is on my website under the what's it called? The Death Camps and the Global Holocaust. You can find it on the front page, the link to this section, and there you will find a video where you can see her say that. Now, she wouldn't have said that in public if it weren't true, and there are other sources that pretty much allude to the same thing. In other words, the European royals are not just aware that there's a great culling, a great genocide in the making, some of them are even looking forward to it. So, remember, these royal families are related among each other, and just like you might hear news from a distant uncle about what's happening in the world, news also travel among the royals, obviously. So if there's any great culling that one royal knows about, all the other European royals most likely will know about it as well. Okay, so it's safe to assume that the royals are in on it, if maybe not actively taking part, then most certainly acquiescing, or at least knowing about it and not alerting anybody to it and not doing anything against it. So we have to assume that they are involved. The other thing that points to it is also that there have been pedophilia scandals in the UK and in Belgium that are now widely published, which seem to indicate that the royals are also part of the same crime and satanic and human sacrifice networks that the black nobility and the Vatican are reported to be involved in. So going down to the Jesuits, it has to be emphasized that they are not just a worldwide intelligence network, they are the worldwide intelligence network. They are the superstructure above all the intelligence agencies we have in the world. In other words, places like CIA, MI6, and even the KGB are just front offices for the Jesuit network. And they are, well, how to put it, they are daughter organizations of the Jesuit networks. The Jesuits have already centuries ago been the biggest intelligence network in the world. You can't create a new intelligence organization like the CIA or MI6 out of thin air and not, assume that you will be captured by these people within the first week, month, or year. So by the end of it, you will be subsumed and become actually a daughter organization of the biggest intelligence network. So by this process, it's pretty clear that they are still the worldwide intel network, but they also have a network of assassins that they are quite famous for. If you buy the book Vatican Assassins, these are the Jesuits, you will be, purchasing a massive tome, which probably must be just volume 1 in my private opinion, but you can see how the Jesuits have been responsible for covert murders around the world throughout the ages. Okay. Now, regarding the Masons, I am aware that the lower levels are oblivious about what they got themselves into. However, it is just a fact that the Masons are a worldwide network tasked with capturing men in every society where they establish their lodges. That's the entire point. You're trying to organize the men in a society, not into the flat hierarchy that they might be born into and that they might enter when they turn 18 and have the right to vote and have every other right that other men and women in that society have. What you're doing by making them join the Masons is you organize them into a bigger pyramid and you make them work climbing the ranks and therefore having to please their superiors within that architecture. Okay, so that is a way to capture all the men in a society. And once you have captured a significant amount of men, you can start subverting and ruling that society. Okay, this is why Masons and secret societies in general are extremely important when you're talking about capture. Now, the final set, the globalists, they have been mapped by ETH Zurich, so the university here in Zurich, and more specifically by the Systems Analysis Department. A group of systems analysts and mathematicians came out with a paper in the year 2011, and they termed this the network of global corporate control. And what they mapped was 43,000 international businesses, and they discovered that these 43,000 businesses were to almost half all part of one big syndicate, one interlocking organization that achieved control over these businesses, not through holding the majority in the shares, but rather through interlocking board memberships and controlling the board of directors. Now, this network of global corporate control has 40% of the companies, but 60% of the revenue. In other words, it has critical mass. Over half of the world revenue of these international companies goes to this syndicate, and you can bet your last penny that this syndicate is tied in with the black nobility and the Vatican Bank. So as far as I can make out, these groups are all one, they are all in it, they're all involved. There might be individuals in every category that are less informed and less involved than others, but it has to be said that overall, these institutions are the ones doing it and coordinating it from the top level down. Now, going one level down, who might be the main perpetrators closer to us, closer within our governments and our own states? There I would certainly count the police, because it's now established that the victims of these directed energy weapon attacks and this global genocide have been reporting the assaults and the murders and the deaths and the mutilation for decades now, and the police has done absolutely nothing. So the police is absolutely involved. Of course, the intelligence agencies are involved, because you can't have so many police reports and so many victims complaining about these assaults on the internet, on YouTube, on Twitter, every day, every night for absolutely years and years and years without the intel agencies knowing about it. So if they know about it and they don't do anything about it, even though they are tasked with fighting terrorism, this means that they are involved. The other group of people, I just called it here the NSA, they are obviously involved because they are the people monitoring the YouTube and the Twitter of the victims, and they are also the people who use the mass surveillance data, pass it to the gang stalkers, and it is through the NSA mass surveillance data that the gang stalkers on the street level can quote private conversations back to us that we had over the phone, over Skype, in emails, and in chats. So of course the NSA is involved. Now I have taken the specific bother of separating Intel, the Intel agencies, and the NSA for the simple reason that the human so the human intelligence section, and the SIGINT, so the signals intelligence section, are staffed by different type of people and different skill sets. So in my mind, even though they do the same kind of stuff and have certainly aligned goals, they are still separate. Now, the other category that has to be counted on the same level with Intel and the police is obviously the military. Okay, so we are talking about military weapons here. Of course, the military has to be involved as well. Now, what I've already mentioned is the contractors. I gave the example of Lockheed Martin that was uncovered by Karen Melton Stewart of running the gang stalking in 47 out of the 50 states. The other thing that we also have regarding contractors is, for example, the testimony of Catherine Austin Fitts, who said that when she was working in the US government, she was the Assistant Secretary for Housing under George Bush. When she was working in the government, she couldn't get access to the data that she needed because the contractors that were running all the computer systems and all the databases refused the information, refused to give her the information, even though she was in the government tasked with procuring that information and mapping what was actually going on in the country. So this implies that the contractors have, first of all, they are involved, they are barring elected officials from access to crucial data, and therefore they must have their hands also in these attacks, right? Because these attacks show up everywhere in the databases. Then, of course, there are the stalkers. They are most obviously involved because they are all around us, right? But also, let's not forget the banks, okay? Because there are huge sums of money sloshing around here in black budgets and so on and so on. And the banks know very well how this entire infrastructure fits together because they see the money flows day in, day out. And finally, I would also say that the biowarfare labs are involved because, you know, modern warfare compounds, pathogens, morgellons don't just by accident end up in people, right? These are very highly specific, human-made, very advanced, sometimes life forms even, right? But certainly nanotechnology, and they are all developed by specialized labs, okay? So as far as I can make out, these are the people who are involved, okay? I should also say that with the stalkers, I mean also the floating death squads wielding directed energy weapons and so on, right? But if we take these groups of people together, this is the minimum set that you need to pull off a genocide as we're seeing it right now. So these people must be involved, okay? So for this reason, I have labeled these organizations and these groups of people as the main perpetrators in our country, and it's also clear that they must be fully captured, or else it wouldn't happen what we're seeing now. So going through again what evidence we actually have of their involvement, I would say the police gives their game away when they refuse to have any investigations. Intel and the NSA are, of course, tasked with the stalking and the surveillance. It's using their dragnet mass surveillance data. The stalking is using Intel hand signs, Intel methods, and the Intel surveillance, national surveillance networks, right? Regarding the military, they are most obviously involved because we're dealing with highly advanced military weapons that are only really accessible to the military and to military intelligence, right? The contractors are obviously involved because they are the ones maintaining the databases, the computer systems, the computer infrastructure, even all the way up until to the satellite systems and so on and so on. Then, of course, the stalkers, they are everywhere. We can see it with our own eyes. The banks control the money flow and they map the money flow day in, day out. They, of course, are involved. They haven't raised an alarm. And, of course, the biowarfare labs must be involved because of the type of pathogens and you know, synthetic things like Morgellons that we find in victims. So this is pretty established, right, that these people are involved. But who else in our society might be a problem? Maybe going further down, you know, the ladder. And this is now the list of people who are certainly complicit. And they have to be complicit, and there's plenty of evidence that they are complicit, okay? But I would also say that these are the people who are only partially captured. So if you remember the previous plot where the main perpetrators who are fully captured, forget about them. At the very top, they are fully all in it, totally in the organized crime. Now, these are the people where you can't really say the same thing. Some of them are complicit, but they're only partially captured because we also have evidence that there are still good people who are fighting this, and you can't say that they are completely gone. So in this category, I would actually count the media, even though I am one of those people publicizing every incident of libel of the victims, of the Holocaust victims, right? But I would still say that by and large, you know, large parts of the media still haven't really fully gotten their head around what's actually going on. Some have, some had plenty of heads up, right? But others really haven't. And when I talk to journalists, I still find people who are utterly shocked and really, really terrified. And that's very clear in their faces. So that's the sign for people who haven't heard about it before. The other group of people who are partially complicit, but not all, are government officials. And there, for example, I have the personal testimony from a lawyer who said that government officials approached the legal chambers with complaints about surveillance, about directed energy weapon assaults, about all sorts of harassment and you know, gaslighting at work. So I can tell that there are many government officials who are also new to these crimes and are being terrorized by them and are also terrified, just like the victims are. But nevertheless, the government officials do provide the data and do provide access, basically, to these perpetrators and do not speak up. So they are most certainly complicit. Now, finally, I would like to talk about the courts, right? The courts, of course, are complicit because I have seen myself corrupt judges with my own eyes. But then again, even in my own court case, I have seen honest judges as well who were shocked, who really thought that this has to be investigated and did everything to support me. So for these reasons, I still hold out and I still say that the courts are only partially captured, right? But of course, I'm aware that they are, you know, tasked with and are engaged in blocking the cases of victims. The other people I would like to mention, very important, are neighbors, because they host the weapons, they do the spying, they do the gaslighting. This is the case in, this is what is happening in the case of every single victim that I know about. The neighbors are always involved, but again, there are also other neighbors who are also victims and have never ever heard about this and are equally terrified. Finally, well, actually not finally, second to last, researchers. Here I count all the university research departments into brain science, for example, but many other types of researchers in other fields that are, you know, you might think are only tangentially connected. But again, while some researchers clearly do use the victim data, clearly do try to access victims' brains remotely, and clearly do publish research that is clearly based on abusive sort of methods, at the same time, there are many researchers who have never heard about it. And I also know about researchers who themselves, I mean, me included, for starters, have fallen victim to all this criminality. So again, this is why I count the researchers, even though some are involved, undeniably, just like the courts, just like the media and the neighbors, I still hold out that the researchers are not quite as deeply complicit at the highest levels, as are, for example, the intel agencies. Then finally, doctors, of course, they have to be mentioned because they are doing the implanting and they are also doing some of the very advanced monitoring of victims. And there are many, many victims who report being pushed pretty much close to death and then being brought back again. Well, for that, you really need the detailed knowledge of doctors. And we do know that they are involved. We also have the names of some, and there are more to come. But again, doctors, there are also, for every doctor, there's also doctors who genuinely try to help. So, but nevertheless, this is what the battlefield looks like, okay? And then the question is, if all these people are involved, how do we recapture these systems from them? Where do we start? And now I would like to go through every single one of them one by one and discuss if and how they could be recaptured from organized crime and utter insanity. Starting with the Vatican, I would say I consider them personally beyond redemption. By the time you're staging human sacrifice rituals in your own catacombs, under your main church, inside your main temple, you pretty much revealed that this is your main agenda. So I have absolutely no truck with these serial killers and pedophiles and child murderers. I think, we should put them aside and come back when we are ready to jail them. Pretty much the same with the black nobility. They are involved in absolutely all the horrific things. They would have the power to stop it. They do not. Instead, they're propagating it. So, there's not much we can do. Now, regarding the royals, I have one big caveat. Unlike the black nobility, the royals are very public and they are bound to the country where they are ostensibly, the head of state. What this means in practice is that, the royals can't just go underground in the same way the black nobility can go underground. Unless they want to spend the end of their days in a military bunker being represented by their body doubles in every public appearance, the royals still do have to somehow try to recapture themselves from this insanity and come back into sanity and try to preserve their family and their health. And then also there are some countries who do have a tradition of executing their royals. And while I absolutely do not advocate that, it is a fact that if it comes to an uprising, the population is not beyond it. Well, you might say that all, beheadings and executions of royals were always staged by the Jesuits and the Masons. You might have a point, but then again, through the internet, we're about to develop completely new systems and bigger networks, and we will be faced by a lot of pissed off people when they discover what has actually been going on. So my heartfelt advice to the royals is that they should try to, migrate out of this ASAP, because I can tell that the Vatican and the black nobility are crumbling and their entire power structure are going down. And the royals still do have a chance, some more than others, it has to be said, right? And I think there's also some differences between the royal families and how deeply involved they are. And for example, just as an example, I have heard pedophile allegations about the British royals and about the Belgian royals, but to this day I haven't heard any, touch wood, this might change any moment, but I haven't heard any about the Swedish royal family. In actual fact, what I know from the Swedish is that their royal family is considered to be just refreshingly normal and very social. This is at least a reputation that they managed to build. It is a beautiful one. It is an extremely powerful one. And it would be a real pity if either it would turn out not to be true, but also if they would let what other criminals are doing, if they would let be dragged into this morass of child murder and, the most horrific human trafficking that you can possibly imagine. So I'm saying this because now we're talking specifically about how to recapture our systems, and it is just a fact that the royal families have so much power. So, any royal that has kept or regained their sanity is worth gold, because they're at the highest levels of decision making. They do wield a lot of power, and they can really turn around the country. And if anything, I think by the time we have a global genocide that is just ripping apart Europe and America, that is the moment when they really have to step up to the plate and pull their weight. This is my personal opinion. But anyway, moving on, the Jesuits I find personally totally beyond redemption. Every single Jesuit who is initiated has to make an oath where he swears to smite the enemies of, of the church, of this Vatican crime cartel actually, and poison them and kill them by any possible means. So when you have a club like that, there's not much you can do, apart from arrest them. So forget about the Jesuits. Regarding the Masons, the lower levels are certainly clueless. So I also know that the top levels are worshipping Baal, which is another esoteric name for Satan, and they are into child sacrifice and human sacrifice and this and that. But at the lower levels, most people are ignorant of this. And this ignorance comes from the different levels, this sort of weird organization that this crime cartel dreamt up to capture men, where they have to, get initiation rituals and have to be good boys to make it up to the next level. So, because of this compartmentalization, a very large fraction of the Masons is clueless. However, they can't be that clueless, okay? Because they see how much money is sloshing around through the Masons and what sort of connections people get. So I think sooner or later, at least the clever ones cotton on to the fact that they're actually involved with organized crime. Now, moving on, the globalists I also consider to be totally beyond redemption. If you think about people like George Soros, who has been revealed to be highly psychopathic in a recently emerged interview where he describes the time of his life in Budapest, where he was basically helping to acid strip the Jews and have them carted off to concentration camps. When a man describes that part of his life as, his most fulfilled or the best time of his life, he is properly beyond redemption. And I think by the time you get to these sort of billionaires and trillionaires, the ruthlessness that has to go with it to make it against your competitors and hold on to your wealth pretty much means that you're a total psychopath, and you will not be open to, compassion and the sort of empathy you need to help to stop a genocide when you can have a more comfortable life. So there we are. The top command and control structure, I think we can forget wholesale. Maybe those people who have some sort of connections to the royals can, start calling them up and meeting them for tea time and informing them that this would now be 2019 would be the year where they would have to decide if they're going to go down with the crime cartel or if they want to cycle back to sanity and back to healthy countries and prosperity and progress for their respective countries. So there we are. So I would say forget about the top unless you've got some insider link to the royals and the Masons. I don't think we can do much in recapturing these people, so let's go one level down. So in summary, this level is just too involved in it all, or too psychopathic, or too self-interested to snap out of it. Okay. Oh yes, I should also say that, as I indicated before, I think not all royals are proper batshit crazy. And those people who manage to hold on to their marbles really need to start, stepping out of this, but I will not hold my breath. So going back down to the level of the state and the state organs, let's talk about these groups that have to be involved and are fully captured. Regarding the police, I think we have to ignore them because they are just too uneducated, and that is just putting it politely. Last year, when I witnessed how a police station in America tried to portray or try to smear victims by claiming that leaflets that victims have distributed to inform other Americans about this genocide, when the police try to claim that people fell ill because those flyers have been laced with fentanyl, and the police thereby proved that they are not capable of thinking through the most fundamental and the very first question of any police investigation, which is the motive, that was the moment when I thought, okay, it's time to give up on the police because, yeah, because of the word that says, it's written there. But anyway, moving on to Intel, I would also say that the vast majority of Intel personnel are just too psychopathic. They are just too mentally damaged and deranged to be of much use. I don't think that trained serial killers or sex predators, which is what these people actually are, I don't think that they will find a way by themselves to stop themselves. So I don't think they can be recaptured from the inside. Now, regarding the NSA, I somehow still hold out, for the computer geeks somehow, because I just hope that they have slightly more brain than for example, the CIA lot, okay, on average, because at least they need to know how to use computers, which is a start, right? But then again, in terms of recapture, I don't think this is something that we can do simply because this organization is highly classified. So there's absolutely no way we can get through to the NSA, right? Unless we put it in our emails and they read it, as a matter of course. But I don't think that we can really expect to recapture the NSA anytime soon. So let's forget about them. Similarly with the military, the same applies to them as for Intel. They are just too psychopathic. Okay, by the time you have trained serial killers in the military and in Intel, these are people who are just gone. Okay, personally, I'm always mildly surprised if people in the military don't spend their weekends going out killing people. Okay, this is just how low my expectations are for them, because let's remember, they are trained serial killers, okay, and they have spent the last couple of decades, if not centuries, going to other countries and murdering innocent people to advance the crown corporations' asset stripping programs. So these are not really the kind of people I would set out to recapture anytime soon. So for these reasons, I do not buy into the Q propaganda about how great the military is. Well, if there are some great people, that's nice, and they should get the hell going because there's a live genocide. But as we have seen in California, where the US Space Command has basically mass murdered Americans and obliterated entire communities and razed them to the ground, I don't personally believe that the military will actually snap out of it anytime soon. So let's move on. Contractors. We basically have no access to them. They are private corporations. If Katherine Horton Fitz, as the Assistant Secretary for Housing, had no access to the databases of these contractors, then we will also not have any access whatsoever. So there's no way we can take any influence on these people from the outside. Similarly with the stalkers, in that case, it's because they are just far too moronic. I don't know about your stalkers, but mine are really what I would call the absolute scum of society. Good luck trying to educate them. So I shall not try. Similarly, the banks, they are just as psychopathic as the military and the intelligence agencies are. And they are also just, far too successful and making far too much money to stop anytime soon. Okay. Now, regarding the biowarfare labs, I would like to say that, again, I don't see any hope of recapturing them simply because they are classified, one has no access, and they are just a world unto themselves, with only the military really having any sort of, any sort of, influence over them. So in summary, I would like to say that these state organs or groups within the state are either too secretive, too psychopathic, or just plain too inaccessible for us victims or for anybody in civil society to set out and recapture them. So now the question is, what the hell shall we do? Are we out of options? And I would say, no, we are not out of options. Let's just keep moving down the ranks to something where we can maybe get a toehold and move from there. Excuse me, I just had to drink something because I'm talking so much. So, in summary, these are all organizations where I would say that recapture is only really possible from the inside by insiders. So these are people who either have worked for these organizations or are working still in them. But for everybody else, these organizations are basically off limits for all the bad reasons, right? And I should also emphasize that it is precisely because they are too secretive, too psychopathic, and so inaccessible that they have ended up in deep capture at all, right? This is precisely the reason, okay? In systems analysis, the laws of system physics say that as soon as you have a secretive organization that is inaccessible, it will become psychopathic and it will end up in deep capture. So let's not be surprised about what happened here, right? Okay, so let's move on. Now, where can we even begin to recapture our organizations if the main perpetrators are out of reach? Well, let's look to the media. Of course, we know the media has refused to report it, but I would also say, after having tried for 2 years, I would say, let's forget about them because, frankly, they're clueless idiots. I'm sorry to say, but they are, okay? I don't think that they have the qualifications or the dedication or any sort of integrity required to pull this off. So they will just crash and burn and, just be forgotten about in our society as fewer and fewer people buy the newspapers, fewer and fewer people watch TV and just turn to the internet and to YouTube and to direct access to people to get their news. So let's forget about the media, doesn't matter, YouTube is better anyway. Oh, by the way, not just YouTube, any sort of social media platform, I should say, but you know what I mean. Okay, so regarding the officials, I would say that yes, that's a good place to start for recapture, for the simple reason that the officials do have a statutory duty to act in the case of crimes against humanity. By the way, most police services have that too. However, as I explained, they might just be too uneducated, for lack of a better word, to actually understand this and act on it. Okay, so government officials are great, and also because they are wielding indirect power. Okay, on the corridors and in the halls of government, people do talk, people take influence on each other, influence over each other. So yes, it is very, very important to talk to government officials. Now, regarding the courts, I think they're also a very good option, simply because judges are highly educated and they do wield direct power. Okay, that shouldn't be underestimated. So that is a very good place to start. Then moving further down, the neighbors, yes, I think that's also very good for a recapture operation, simply because your neighbors will also be affected. You can't be a victim without any of your neighbors being affected, because these directed energy weapons, they scatter of metal surfaces, right? If you use shielding, these shots will be reflected and parts of the shots will be reflected off onto other neighbors, right? And the entire directed energy weapon and gang stalking operation typically doesn't just affect a single person, but is trying to take over an entire neighborhood, okay? So your neighbors might just be perfectly placed for you to start, getting through to them and getting across to them how important these topics are. So if you want to recapture bits of your life from criminality, your neighbors might actually be the easiest and the quickest way to get started. Researchers, I also think that they are a very good place to start because they are highly educated, okay? And those who are not involved will be shocked to hear this, will understand exactly what we're talking about. And researchers and academics have also got very good information skills. So this is the search for information, finding information, but also communicating information, because most of these people also give regular speeches and lectures and talks. Then finally, the doctors, yes, they are an excellent place to start a recapture because many of them are highly altruistic. So of course, there are psychopathic doctors who do the implanting, but then for every psychopathic doctor, there are many others who are highly altruistic. And it is just a sad fact of our society that doctors too have been exploited by this crime cartel. Most doctors are massively overworked, very badly paid. Their pensions are in danger, right? Their entire work environment is in danger and their work conditions are in danger. So doctors are very intelligent and they understand very, very quickly what we're trying to communicate to them. So by and large, I think these are the main, the sort of main groups in our society that can be recaptured, right, and should be looked at for recapture. But the question is how? How shall we go about recapturing these? So on that topic, I would like to say that regarding the bottom line of neighbors, researchers, and doctors, I would recommend, oh, sorry, I should also say that, sorry, this is how I ordered them. So if you look at the bottom line of neighbors, researchers, and doctors, their immediate benefit would be direct victim assistance, okay? Your neighbors can help you, doctors can help you, and even researchers can help you with researching the academic, the scientific papers and putting all this together. There are a lot of academics, legal academics, who can help you prepare your case, because this is rather important. It is one of the biggest court cases in the 21st century. So, you know, legal academics should also take an interest in these cases. So that's a great place to start for victim assistance, but to actually shut down these crimes, that's only really possible through those groups and through those organs of the state that have access to power, right? Officials, as I explained, have indirect power and courts have direct power. Now, of course, it depends what sort of government official you're talking about. If you're talking about the President of the United States, that is also, right, the head of the armed forces or the chief of the armed forces, well, those sort of people, of course, have a lot of direct power, but even they have to agree themselves with, you know, the opposition, with Congress, with Parliament, with whatever other organs inside the government. So it's not that easy. Whereas if you have courts, you sometimes have a single judge making a decision that has immediate repercussions. So the top two tiers are really the sources of power. And it is for this reason, for this divide into these people without direct power, but people who can actually assist victims, and the second class of people with direct power. It is for this reason that I would say that really we should focus on these people like neighbors, academics and researchers and doctors with info campaigns, okay? And we should focus our attempts to shut these crimes down on officials and the courts, okay? Now, if we look at the two organs in the state that have real power, let's just analyze these two. So this is the officials and the courts now, okay? What can we say about them? Are there any differences? How are they operating? What are their characteristics? Now, regarding that, I would say that both of them, officials and the courts, can lead to immediate action. Okay, so in the terms of the President of the United States, you have the executive orders. In terms of the judges, you have the judgments. Both of them can take immediate effect and lead to immediate action. That's a good thing when you're trying to stop a live genocide. However, in the case of officials, you don't really have direct access. You can't just walk into, you know, some government building, sit down in front of an official and say, okay, your task is now to deal with what I'm presenting here. In contrast, that's exactly what you do when you walk into a court to get an emergency injunction. You walk into a court building, you sit down in front of a judge and you say, hey, judge, you will now listen to what I have to present, and, you know, you have to decide one way or the other. And here I also already gave away the second aspect, which is you cannot point officials at individual cases necessarily, right? You might come with a petition or you might come with a very large collection of cases, but an individual cannot really go with their personal case to a government and say, you guys have to help me with my personal case. That's not really this sort of ad hominem functioning is not really how governments operate, okay? In contrast, that is exactly how courts operate. They are focused on individuals, they're there for individuals and for the protection of the rights of individuals. So when I compare these two, I see the advantages and disadvantages. It is pretty clear that the courts are still the best option as far as I can make out. And it is for these reasons that I say we should go and recapture the courts first. Okay? So, and now with we, I'm talking about victims, people out, you know, Joe blogs, you know, Jane Doe, just the people in a society, in civil society, who don't necessarily have any sort of insider links or any sort of professional connections to the people in these organizations and groups that I was talking about. Okay, so for the rest of us, the courts are really the best option as far as I can make out, right? And they have several things going for them. Number one, they are a public venue. That's very important. Everyone can go and have a look, right? Everyone can listen to the court case. The second thing is they do offer direct access, and I should also emphasize direct and immediate access in the case of injunctions. They also make immediate orders. So if you go into the London High Court, for example, you can go in, pay the fee, the court fee, and stand in front of a judge within half an hour, and then expect that by the end of your hearing, the judge will come up with some sort of order. It is extremely swift. Also very important, as I said before, the focus is on individuals. So this is individual victims, individual cases, and individual perpetrators who can be held accountable. Very important also is that every court case generates lasting documentation, right? So you can quote the court case, you can quote the transcript, it's an official document, and the evidence quoted is the highest evidential standard we have in civil society, with the possible exception of research papers. Also, it should be borne in mind that a court order or court judgment has international repercussions, even if it's in a different jurisdiction. This is certainly the case for the entirety of the Anglo-Saxon jurisdiction, right? So there might be certain judgments in the US that maybe don't have a direct effect of things on things in the UK, but if it's about something really extreme, you can quote it as a precedent or as an example of another country coming to terms with that type of criminality. Finally, not finally, sorry, as the next point, because thankfully there are many more points, it has to be emphasized that the courts are also very susceptible to reputational damage. And that is because, for better or worse, to this day, the courts still have the kind of, well, claim, or certainly the kind of, image that they are there to deliver justice. So, it would be very, very odd and very difficult if suddenly that reputation gets damaged, okay? Now, the other thing that's also very important when you're dealing with complex cases is that the judges are highly educated. And as I've mentioned before, I spent about a year watching the live stream of the UK Supreme Court, where I listened to all sorts of cases, but many of them extremely complex commercial cases. And I can assure you that these judges, they can pay attention. They can absorb just bundles and bundles and just hundreds of pages of information and still come to, to a conclusion. So that is very important given, what highly complex cases we're dealing with. And then finally, I would also like to say that judges' careers depend on their long-term record. So this means that if, for example, it turns out that the judge is making corrupt decisions in the case of crimes against humanity, of the most horrific crimes, of the most horrific kind seen since the Nazi times and the Second World War, then, this would lead to severe damage to a judge's reputation, and it might end up with the judge being removed from the judiciary. And then the question is, a disgraced judge like that, where could he or she go? Could she start working for legal chambers somewhere with the reputation of being a lying criminal, um, or somebody who subverts cases for, a covert cartel? I think that would be very difficult. So, this is a real pressure point that you can apply to to the courts and to the judges, and use it to force them to act with integrity. Okay, so far so good. There are all these things going for the courts. Now, what are the potential problems? Okay, first of all, this is undeniable. It is extremely time consuming to prepare a court case. Second of all, it requires a very high standard in the way you write, in the way you express yourself, in the way you organize information, and in the standard of evidence. Also, victims need to expose themselves publicly. Okay, so you would have to stand up before a judge, explain your case, sometimes maybe very private details in public because this is a public venue, right? And also give him or her access to very private information and private details in your court bundle. Okay, so this might be highly uncomfortable for the victims, and for this reason, it has to be borne in mind. And also, not every victim is a natural, lecturer, a natural person who likes to present a case. Okay, so it can be very, very difficult for people to do this. And also, it has to be said that the courts, and this is now an open secret, have been distorted by what I call fake law. And with that, I mean things like admiralty law in the US, where every US citizen is claimed to be in actual fact lost at sea and is now just represented by a trust, and so on and so on, and these sort of things. So that's what I call fake law. It's like a hidden layer that is trying to take rights away from people through the back door. And then, of course, it is very expensive to hire lawyers. This is undeniable. Lawyers, I am very afraid to say, are venal and are very easy to bribe, as it seems to be the case, or certainly easy to blackmail. Okay, because with the lawyers I had dealings with professionally, I have to say I have seen quite, astounding things. But then, of course, right, regarding the judges, it is equally easy to threaten, bribe, or blackmail a single judge. Okay, so that is certainly a potential problem. It's a weak point of this entire system. And then, of course, judgments are very hard to reverse. So when you have a certain judgment, maybe by a bribed or threatened or somehow compromised judge, you would have to appeal. Maybe your appeal isn't granted, and so on and so on. It also has to be said that traditionally these people are a closed club. In fact, a closed, almost all male club, right? So yes, you have to prepare for that. And finally, right, some of them, not all, but some of them are in actual fact professional tricksters. Okay, and keep in mind that things like the admiralty law fraud that has been pulled on the US and other places has been kept alive by the very judges and the very attorneys and barristers who have been arguing these cases. Okay, so you are really entering a den of vipers here. Okay, now the question is, with facing all these potential problems, should we give up on the courts or not? And I say, given all the positive things that we have seen, including direct power, I don't think we have the leisure to give up on them, because we are running out of organs of state that we can actually address with these crimes against humanity. So instead of despairing, let's just think about what could we do about the problems. Okay, now regarding the time-consuming aspect of the court cases, I would say we start working with templates. For example, the affidavit templates that I've prepared for the tick box survey, okay? Now, there are many, many more templates that we can develop to speed up this process, okay? Second of all, it is very simple, actually, in many cases, to ensure that victims have the same type of evidence or the same standard of evidence. We can find out what the best measuring devices are. We can teach each other how to do these measurements. We can all film the measurements. We can find out what the hand signs and the general, setup of the gang stalkers are. We can all buy digital cameras and dash cams and all this sort of stuff. We can also all learn how to prove this nanotechnology and get electron microscopy or X-ray fluorescence analyses done for our samples. And bit by bit, we can learn how to produce this high level of evidence. Okay, so this is not a showstopper by any means. It is just another learning curve. Finally, about the aspect of having to expose oneself, I'm very, very pleased to report that the shame and intimidation that went with becoming a target has utterly vanished. So, what we actually see is very confident victims talking about it on YouTube, on social media, in interviews, and this is how it should be, because the victims have absolutely nothing to hide and absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. Okay, so I don't actually think that this is that big a problem. Okay, and it will become less and less of a problem as we all discover that actually the victims are the majority, not the minority. Finally, regarding the, sorry, I started saying finally. I think this is one of these things that they do with my brain. Regarding the fake law aspect, there are the human rights, right, which are valid for every human being, okay, inalienable human rights, and there is the common law, okay, so we can learn how to revert back away from fake law back to real law, real justice, and real courts. Regarding the lawyers, I would say yes, for sure, they are expensive. It's very expensive to hire these lawyers, but then again, you can go pro se. You can use templates and you can have backup. For example, if you had the backup of expert testimonies, of many, many victim testimonies, and maybe the backup of a so-called Mackenzie friend, which is a person who is not quite a lawyer, but somebody who maybe has some basic legal training and can assist you in court. If you had all this, you could go pro se and probably do a much better job than these disinterested lawyers who are frankly just after the money, which they're going to get if you win or not. Okay, so I would say that this also hangs together with the second point about the lawyers being venal and easy to bribe. I personally would say avoid lawyers if you can, or avoid them at all costs, because, I always say you can lose a case yourself for free. You don't have to pay some corrupt bastard to lose the case for you for a lot of money. Anyway, so regarding the judges, on the one hand, yes, judges are easy to threaten and blackmail, but then again, because judges are so very public, and because their corruption and their kind of, if they any shenanigans that they try to pull would become very public, exactly what the intelligence agencies are doing with blackmail, the general public and the victims can do with, I would say, positive emotional blackmail, which is exactly the type of external pressure that just helps judges to stay on this side of the law and on this side of justice, and can be used to pressure them into acting, in a good fashion, and acting in, to uphold the rule of law. Okay, and to help to protect the victims. So this is really a double-edged sword. You can either leave it entirely up to Intel to go around and putting pressure on judges, or you can do set your own things into motion regarding maybe friends who would be doing YouTube reporting about your court case. You can drum up your own media campaign very quickly these days, and you can in actual fact put pressure on these judges, especially if you always use their names, in all these publications. Now, it is true that judgments are hard to reverse. However, you can appeal, and you can also increase the pressure with every appeal. Okay, and I will say a lot more about that in a moment. And yes, it is true that traditionally the courts are a closed club, but then again, that's just one more reason to break them up now, right? And let give other people access to them, because frankly, we all need to be able to use the courts. And finally, yes, there might be professional tricksters out there, but we can deplete their bullshit arsenal at some point, as I say. Okay, so we can learn every single trick that they might pull. We can learn how to guard against that. Okay, so it's not that all is lost. So when you look at it item by item, it turns out that actually for everything that you might be afraid of, there are things that you can do to fight back or to counter them, or maybe to just annihilate these problems entirely. Okay, so I would say by and large, we're still good to go with the courts. By and large, this is still the best option. Okay, so now the question is, yes, that's in theory, that's fine, but aren't the courts also captured? Yes, of course they are captured. They are captured just like all the other institutions in our government as well, right? Now, you can either chicken out over that fact, or you can look at it more closely and start going about the entire process of recapturing a bit more scientifically, okay? Now, what I would propose to do is that if we are faced with a captured organization, we sit down with pen and paper and we actually draw on that pen and paper what capture actually looks like. Okay? Now, what I've done here is I have drawn an organigram, okay? And this organigram could represent any organization, because pretty much every single organization on the planet is a pyramid organization, okay? But I've just taken this organigram, and in this case, I use it to map the court system. This needn't be the US or the UK court system. This could be the Indian court system or any other court system, okay? By and large, these courts have, a hierarchy of separate courts. At the very top, you have some sort of Supreme Court, then you have a Court of Appeal, one layer down, and then you have the High Court, or the county courts at the bottom. Now, in the high courts themselves are the individual judges, okay? What I have done now with this organigram is I have drawn a captured organization, whereby green means these people or these organs or these courts are okay, and black means they are captured. So the way it works is, if you have a particular collection of judges, for example, over here, and all the judges in this, high court are corrupt, of course, the entire high court is corrupt. If more than half of the judges are corrupt, then the court is corrupt. But if more than half are okay, then the court is okay. All right? And then I have done the same thing going up, because it is a fact that Court of Appeal judges are recruited from High Court judges, and Supreme Court judges are recruited typically from Court of Appeal judges, and so on. Okay, so what I have done is I have kind of escalated the capture up to build a model of a captured organization. So in this section here, because two high courts below or more than half of the high courts in the district of the Court of Appeal are captured, I also assume that the Court of Appeal is captured by now, okay? But of course, if more than half are okay, then I assume that the Court of Appeal still might be okay. By the time you get to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court being, formed by members of the Court of Appeal, I say if the Courts of Appeal are captured on average, then the Supreme Court is captured too. Okay, by the time you reach this sort of organization, you have on every level a majority of these institutions captured. So of course the Supreme Court is captured. This is deep capture at the highest level. Okay, then the Court of Appeal, you have here 2 captured, 1 not captured, so on average they are captured. Okay, and then 1 layer down you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is that right? 2, 4, 5, yes, 5 captured high courts, and you have 4 high courts that are okay. So this organization is captured on every level. But what I say is that just because the system is captured doesn't mean that it's hopeless. Okay, because look at it, you still have functioning sections inside the judiciary. And when you want to recapture an organization, of course you have to tackle an organization that is captured to start with. If it weren't captured to start with, you wouldn't have to recapture it, right? So let's not get our knickers into a twist. Let's just look at it more carefully. So if we have this sort of model, all right, this is a judiciary in deep capture, as I said. What you need to do is you need to start putting pressure on the organization from the bottom up, okay, from the bottom up. And that's because you have many, many more players at the bottom than you have at the top, okay, so you get a power amplification through that. So starting at the very bottom, in this example alone, we have 27 judges, and out of these 14 are corrupt and 13 are okay. So I would say start the recapture with these 13 who are okay, right? Because when you look at it at this level, you do have almost 50-50, right? With the majority more, well, it's a majority, unfortunately, more than half is corrupt, but it's such a close number, right? You still have a 1 in 2 chance, essentially, of meeting an honest judge. So let's start with this, okay? But now how are we going to go about recapturing this organization in detail, okay? This is how we're going to do it, guys. So think about the judges and think about the cases that you bring to these judges. When you get a case and you would enter the court and you would be before a judge. If you meet a corrupt judge, of course your case gets blocked, gets thrown out, all sorts of weird things happen, and the whole thing goes bottom up. Of course, fair enough. But when the next case, when the next case comes along, that case might meet an honest judge, right? This one here is green. In that case, you have a normal court hearing, you have a normal judgment that's taking account all your evidence, you might actually get a judgment in your favor, right? And most importantly, this is something that has to be borne in mind, it doesn't even matter what type of judge you get, because whichever case you bring, it creates public documentation. It creates lasting documentation. So with the second case, you have already doubled the lasting public documentation, okay? And now it just so happens that you are also, up against an honest judge, so you actually can advance further. You might be blocked at a higher level. If the other parties appeal, the Court of Appeal might still block you, but nevertheless, you manage to put one type of judgment on the books, right? Okay. So the idea is to keep throwing cases at the judiciary and then ratchet with case by case towards disclosure. Okay? So what does this look like? Well, you have these 2 cases, then the next one comes along, this one meets again a corrupt judge, then the next case comes along, this also meets a corrupt judge. In the normal world, and in the way most people think, at this point they would stop, because they would start bringing the narrative that, oh, well, there was once a really honest judge, but look, we now had 3 cases in a row where we were up against a total bastard. Everybody knows the judiciary is captured. There's nothing we can do. Boo-hoo. We just can't go to the courts. Now, this is how normal people think, because they basically have a tunnel vision. They are approaching these systems like rats in a maze. and then the rat runs along the judiciary system, and at some point, oh, it finds water, and oh no, another time it finds a rat trap. Okay, so that's how most people think. If you zoom out and you look at the maze from above, it's clear what you have to do. You have to just keep going because it was just a random cluster, okay? So then you just keep throwing cases, and look, lo and behold, the next case is a good one. It meets an honest judge, and also if it ever progresses, look, there's a chain of just pure integrity, as good as, you know, escalating up all the way to the Court of Appeal. So this would be almost like a home run, okay, for this case. Even if the other parties should appeal, the Court of Appeal is of integrity, or sorry, you know, it's the High Court. The Court of Appeal is of integrity, and so on and so on, okay? So you keep going, and as you keep going, you keep probing the judiciary. But then what's very, very important is that you don't just go alone and only care about your case. No, you make it a program. You make it a program to stop the genocide and use the courts to stop the genocide, and then you watch every single case like a hawk. You don't spend your evenings watching TV, you spend your evenings listening to the recording or reading the transcripts from these court cases, and you spend your free days going to the court hearing, because that's just how much your life is worth. Okay? If you do that, and we start discussing what went wrong in every court case, and most importantly, we start naming names, and we say, okay, let's just recap who were the judges who were odd, to say the least. Who were the judges where it was utterly hopeless to get from A to B? Who were the judges who were totally fine with an ongoing Holocaust? And then we make a list. We start mapping the High Court of a country, okay, and we start drawing up lists. And we say, this judge, he was, well, you know, corrupt, we would say. This judge, on the other hand, his colleague, he was great, and so on and so on. When you start doing that, you're doing what Gerhard Ulrich has done for very, very many court cases in Europe and in Switzerland. He basically mapped the judiciary of Switzerland. He can tell you who the corrupt judges are, who the so-la-la judges are, and who the judges with integrity are. Okay? Now, that is exactly what we need. And what we also need is we need to rattle down the names of these judges over and over and over, so that it starts having reputational repercussions when they try to pull bullshit, which judges do. Not all, but the corrupt ones will try to screw you over. If we then keep repeating who the judge is by name and what precise bullshit he tried to pull, that news is going to spread throughout the judiciary. And a lot of lawyers are on Twitter and spend their free time trying to relax, you know, tapping into the news. And this type of, you know, reports, if not even gossip about a certain judge, sticks, I can assure you. And by the way, that's also what lawyers do internally. They also do know who the stern, who the very, you know, easily bored judges are, and so on and so on. They do have the map. Civil society doesn't have the map. But now if you make this public, what we're starting to do is we're starting to attach a cost to being corrupt. Okay? You might find yourself in a highly corrupt you know, high court, like over here on the right, where you have all judges in a high court being as corrupt as can be. These people in a system like that would have a very cushy, you know, and also very toxic type of work environment where corruption is good, right? And stabbing daggers in each other's back is a good thing, right? And these people, if they're all highly psychopathic and very criminal, they get along fine, and they are as happy as can be in these type of systems. When you start banding their names around in a much bigger pool, in the big pool of public opinion, that's when it starts to hurt. Okay, Then they're out of their cushy little corrupt clique, and suddenly their name keeps reappearing on YouTube videos, keeps reappearing in tweets that are then sent to all the, barristers and lawyers who are on Twitter. So this is how you can start putting pressure on these people. And you have to remember that when victims of the intelligence agencies go into a court, even an honest judge will experience the intelligence agencies trying to pressure him or her. Okay, so in other words, if we want to keep this judge on the right side of the law, we have to apply more pressure on him than MI5, MI6, or the CIA or whoever might apply to him. Okay, so we have to put some kind of pressure on him. Now, I'm not going to hold a gun to any judge's head, right? And I don't advise anybody doing that. So the only thing that is open to us is public pressure. Okay. So, as we are playing this, right, also, of course, the question is, what do we do when cases are rejected, right? Are we just going to give up? Are these victims who are, meeting a corrupt judge going to be shredded and we just forget about them? And the answer is no, of course not, right? What we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to correct the rejected cases. We're going to appeal, and we are going to go back into court with fresh collective evidence and with the reference towards newer cases where the decision was maybe diametrically opposed to what that particular judge came up with. Okay, so in other words, what we do is we develop a pact that whoever goes through the trouble of generating a court case, getting it up to scratch, and submitting it to the court, we help, we keep a media eye, we do our own media outreach, we start talking, we start tweeting about it, and then it doesn't matter how the person fares, we keep an eye on them and we keep supporting them until this entire genocide system has been shut down. Okay, so if you go into court, don't think that if you meet a corrupt judge, that's it. You had your chance, you've blown it. There it is. You have to just sit there and let yourself be tortured to death. This is not how it is. It's about the collective effort of recapturing a corrupted system. You can't do it on your own. Some of us have to just pull, draw the Black Peter, as it were, end up with the corrupt judges. Some of us will be the lucky ones, right? It doesn't matter. What really matters is how we create lasting public documentation, how we move forward, and how we also learn how to claw back cases that were thrown out by corrupt judges and how we resubmit those cases back into the judiciary, and we keep doing it until the system does what we expect from it, which is to protect the lives of innocent people. Okay, so this is the plan. This is how you recapture systems. Typically, what happens is that somebody has a bad experience and then they run away, they hide somewhere, they have spent all their money on highly corrupt lawyers, and their life is ruined, and they spend the rest of their life telling the other victims that you should never ever go into a court. Now, this is not how we play this. We step out of the rat maze, we look at the system from above, we identify all the judges by name, and we keep a very close forensic eye on any bullshit that they will try to pull. Okay? And if they try to pull anything, we will give them hell through our media operations. And we will never ever let that judge forget that he tried to do something highly corrupt. Okay? This is how we keep our systems healthy. And I can tell you that capture of organizations is a natural process because there is always a psychopath. There are always people who are really venal and really corrupt. Okay? So psychopaths are at least 1 in 100. Some people say it's up to 5 in 100. So when you have a judiciary of several thousand judges, you will have a bunch of psychopaths. And then on top of that, you will have the corrupt people. So in other words, what I'm proposing to do is nothing extraordinary. It's something that we should have been doing all along, but none of us ever did, apart from Gerhard Ulrich, okay, who did it for Switzerland. And then also, if we are successful with this, I can tell you that exactly the same principles apply to intelligence, to the military, to the police, to doctors, to researchers, to every single system, for the simple reason that every single system is a pyramid organization. So here we are. Okay, so this is how we're going to recapture it. Keep in mind, it's not a single effort. Keep in mind, we're not going to chicken out or freak out if we meet a corrupt judge. We'll just keep going, and we will never ever leave any victims behind. So we will work to resubmit their cases until we get justice for everybody. Okay, so this is what I propose to do. Now, if this is the plan, and I hope by now you understand why I'm focusing on the courts, for the simple reason that the other organs of state are either inaccessible, far too captured, far too psychopathic, or far too classified, okay? So the courts are the only place where we can go where we as individuals have a right that we can enforce. And the courts are the only place where you can make an organ of the state, like a judge, like the judiciary, work for you. You can make the entire state snap into action so that something is done for you. This is how it should be, okay? And this is what we should aim for. So, given that this is the plan, how do I propose to go about doing it, okay? And what do we need for this? Well, what I envision for this entire process in 2019 is the following. So up until now, this was just a theory of explaining the theory you needed to understand and the facts and descriptions you needed to understand in order to have the map in your mind, right, of what we're doing here. And now let's get down to it. So my plan for 2019 is the following. I first of all would like that tick box affidavits are used in court to prove what types of crimes are typical in this genocide, and also to prove the existence of this global genocide in itself. The timescale I envision for the filling out of the tick box affidavits is really winter 2019. The template has been finished. Filling out the template does take some time, but at the end of the day, it is like, you know, just a tick box survey, right? So it's not that hard. So with enough weeks left from in winter 2019, most victims should be able to do this, okay? So we can really get going. Now, the purpose of this would be to get all the evidence together about the crimes themselves, to file for emergency injunctions against the intel agencies and the military for every single victim based on this collective evidence. And I would like to submit the emergency injunctions by spring 2019. Okay. Now, the reason why I'm going for emergency injunctions, because you can look up injunctions on Wikipedia. Injunctions are invoked when you need to make the other party stop. You need to make the other party stop doing something in order that you don't suffer more damage, more irreparable damage that money couldn't actually rectify. In our case, this is precisely what it is, because we are being gunned with directed energy weapons 24/7. We are being neurologically degraded. We are being raped. We are being mutilated, and our life is stolen from us. No money in the world can ever pay that back. So in other words, this is the precise situation that emergency injunctions were devised for. Okay? And then, of course, it has to be borne in mind that injunctions are the first step to prevent the other party from doing something, and they can be invoked before more involved litigation is started. So in other words, we need to have these in order to be able to collect the information and write it together, because I don't know about you guys, but I personally, I can't even hold a thought in my head when I'm being gunned. So how on earth am I expected to prepare a court case? Okay, so This is why I'm going for the emergency injunctions. The second thing is that we need to arrest the heads of intel and the military and the lower level perps as quickly as possible to stop a mass genocide, because these people are out there every day and every night gunning people with the directed energy weapons hidden in cars, hidden in rucksacks, the directed energy weapons mounted on satellites, right? And these Jesuit and Masonic and Black nobility and what's it, top level commands, right? The globalist commands. That's what they want. They want the great culling. They want the mass genocide. We know who they are. We know what they are doing. And now we all need to come together in the only public platform that we have, which is the courts, the only public platform that can act in our favor, and say, please stop this. Now, given that they're not going to stop, we need to have arrests. We need to remove the people from office. Then after we have this, okay, and I would really urge, the arrest to start in spring and summer 2019, or else we're all fucked. Okay, so after the arrests, that's when we all had time to recover, not being gunned in the genitals and in the head and in the lungs, right, 24/7. When we had that, we do have the possibility to write together our affidavits in detail, create detailed perp lists, detailed offenses, and sort and present all of our personal evidence. Okay, and I want us to do that by summer 2019. But for that to happen, all the other steps have to be followed, right? Because if we don't have emergency injunctions, if we don't have arrests, there's no way in hell the victims who are being tortured in a live Holocaust can actually prepare court cases. You can't expect the people in Auschwitz to prepare court cases, can you? So this is why it's so important. And then, of course, once we have the detailed affidavits and the full court cases, that is when we are striving for towards compensation for the victims in these detailed court cases. Now, there's no time estimate because I don't know how long that might take. It could be months, it could be years. Now, I presume that they would want it to be years so that they don't have to pay us. But then, you know, I will start talking in great detail about what you can do about that. So this is it. So this is the plan as I envision envisage it for 2019. Okay, now let's talk about what do we need to do to actually make it happen. First of all, regarding the tick box affidavits that should be finished by winter 2019, I need as many victims as possible to fill these out, okay? Now, you don't even have to send me the affidavits. It would be great because then I can publish it and other people can benefit it. But you, all you victims among yourselves, you need to find some sort of format where you can compare your cases quickly and reliably, okay? So that you know what you're dealing with and who can back up your evidence and so on and so on. So we need to speed up this type of organization, and we need to know what we are each complaining about and testifying about. Okay, so it is for this reason that these tick box affidavits are useful. Now, what we need is we need these victim testimonies about all the different types of crime, right? First of all, and that's very important because if you just complain about gang stalking and you're too embarrassed to talk about directed energy weapons or voices in your head, which are actually implants, they are ear implants, right? Then we can't stop the voice to skull weapon system. So we need victims to be honest, and I can tell you that voice to skull and voices in your head are just the bog standard of intel criminality. Okay, that's a military weapon system. So what you need to do, you need to be honest and you need to start testifying about this stuff. You also need to testify about the brutality of these attacks and the intensity, because I assure you the people who are not suffering it, they have no comprehension what you and I are going through. I also would like to say that most judges are unaware of the existence and also the details of this current genocide. So they do need to see the full insanity of intel and the military. Okay. to be able to understand this criminality, they really need to be told what we are all suffering in its entirety. I also would like to emphasize that this only works if our affidavits are court standard. So this means it has to be under oath, it has to be accompanied with valid ID, identification, which is a passport, an identity card, or a driver's license if you don't have a passport or identity card, right? It needs to be signed, and most importantly, it needs to be signed before witness who is a person entitled to administer oaths. What this means, excuse me, is that this person, what this means is that this person certifies that you have signed this yourself. You have not signed it under duress. Nobody held a gun to your head. You signed it being fully, within your mental faculties, right? In full possession of your mental faculties. And you are indeed the person who claims to have signed this affidavit. When we have satisfied this, which is not that hard, you actually have something that is, it's almost like cast in stone. Courts have a very hard time, just making that disappear because it is such a high standard. Once these affidavits are anonymized and published anonymously, others can use them to prove these crimes to police, courts, doctors, and family and friends. Okay, so in other words, this is multi-purpose. We are trying to fight court cases and we're trying to recapture the judiciary first, but along the way, we can already start the work to recapture the police and doctors and whoever else might be relevant to us. Okay, so it actually has an amplification benefit if these affidavits are filled out. Then I also would like to say that the affidavits are a very good preparation for the full-length affidavits. Most victims' cases are so vast and incorporate so many different offenses that it is just plain overwhelming for the average victim just to tackle it. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to have one quick run-through where most victims can testify very speedily about what exactly has happened. And then in a later run through, they can go into details. It's much more manageable that way. And then, of course, you can use these tick box surveys already as an opportunity to collect and start sorting your evidence, right? You would have to do it anyway. Now, for the emergency injunctions, what we urgently need is that these victim affidavits need to be ready by March 2019, okay? For the emergency injunctions to be able to be filed. We also need expert affidavits. Okay, so these also need to be collected in January or February. Very, very important. With expert affidavits, I mean the leading experts for directed energy weapons, implants, black budgets, intel criminality, for example, like false flags and stage events, AI, medical technology, and all the other things. And we need these experts because all these different fields hang together, right? The black budgets show, or the information we have on the missing trillions that went into the black budgets, tell us how on earth the crime cartel managed to pull up this vast system around us, right? It's not that hard if you have trillions. You are basically running a parallel state. Okay, so these experts, unfortunately, because we can't pay them, would have to testify pro bono, right? But then again, if these experts make the affidavits general purpose, right, we can use them for posterity. Now, what I would like to say is that the written affidavits have to be pro bono, but then it should also be just, standard that these experts, if they come to testify to a court, their expenses and also all the work that went into the affidavit should be paid by the courts. Okay, so this is also something that I really want to enforce, that the experts who do all this amount of work get paid back for it. And then the other thing is that we need a reference list, okay, to submit to the courts. This is incorporating all the information we have from declassified documents, articles, etc., etc. All right. We also have to draft a couple of legal templates for each jurisdiction, and this is, as I said, to make these court cases simpler to assemble. Okay, now these legal templates, they should first of all contain the legal arguments, which are pretty universal for all the victims. So if you figured it out once, we just do a copy and paste. But also they should contain what one has to do to get these emergency injunctions. You know, all the formalities, what do the documents have to look like, yada, yada, yada. These are the templates. We also need to try to recruit pro bono lawyers to help to draft these templates, but I have to be honest, my gut feeling is that lawyers will not come forward because they haven't so far, right? I mean, I had more doctors promise to help me than I had lawyers promise to help me, so I would not hold my breath. And it's not that bad because at the end of the day, we can do the research ourselves and we can figure it out ourselves, so it's not a showstopper. I also would like to say that injunction cases, right, is what I would call litigation light, because it is a temporary order or it is just an emergency order. It's not necessarily the same standard and the same level of complexity that you would have to master if you're really asking for millions of compensation. And at the very first, we're just asking for these criminals to stop raping and mutilating us 24/7 in our own homes and when we're out in the street, right? So the more egregious the case, the easier it should be to argue it for, you know, a lay person. That's my view. Now, regarding the arrests, what I would like to say is, of course, we need to identify the top criminals, state and contractor criminals by March 2019. Okay. This would include the current and recent Director Generals and Chiefs of the US and European intel communities, okay, for sure. It would also uh, involve the relevant military leaders, for example, the US Space Command, okay, that have this super AI, this massive supercomputer, more computing power than everybody else in the world combined, right? So they would be certainly up on that list. But it would also mean the CEOs of major contractors, for example, Lockheed Martin, that we know is involved in all this genocide. Also, the heads of diffusion centers and senior handlers, you know, need to be identified and need to be put on this list. And finally, also the researchers and research universities using victim data and running brain to computer interfaces. Then I would say we get the main perpetrators and then we get the full list of perpetrators later when we get the detailed victim affidavits from everybody, which would be in summer 2019. Now, I would say that we request already within the injunctions the immediate removal and arrest of these people, of the main top leading perpetrators, just so that we can stop this mass murder. Because as we have seen, the US Space Command has just decimated California using satellite-based directed energy weapons, right? And these people are basically just randomly killing people, right? So if we want to stop that, we really need to grab the major generals, you know, who are in charge of the US Space Command. As soon as they step off the base, they need to be arrested, right? And we need to keep arresting the military leadership until we deplete these criminal bastards from the base. So then I also talked about the second wave of arrests, and these are based on the detailed affidavits. This would hopefully be autumn and winter 2019. It has to be in order to stop the genocide. This would include the death squads operational in neighborhoods and on roads, right? So in other words, we need to identify the neighbors and the death squad flats and the people who may be going in and out of them by summer 2019. I also would like to say that in case you're worrying that this is too daunting, rest reassured that the full signals intelligence chain is stored by NSA. For example, at Bluffdale, but I assure you also at other, you know, covert backup sites globally. Open brackets, Switzerland is one of them, I'm pretty sure, right? So there are all these places around the world where this data is being stored, And, you know, in this world, neither money nor data is ever lost. Somebody is always holding on to it. Okay, so we do already have all the data. Every person involved can already be identified by their telecommunications data, right? And what we need to do is we need to actually start accessing this information. Similarly, every single trained assassin is known to CIA and MI6, and also the KGB, these days known as the FSB, okay? And that's because it's these people who trained them. All right, there might be some big military underground bunker somewhere on an underground city where they were breeding super soldiers. Nevertheless, right, MI6 and the CIA know where these places are. It is their job to infiltrate these places and know who's going in and who's coming out and who has been born there. So, you know, all this is already known, people. We just have to reach out for this information, and we have to get this information from the people who we can prove know this sort of stuff. Then you also have to keep in mind that these criminals are paid using the BACS and the SWIFT payment systems. At the lower ranks, of course, they are paid by gift vouchers, right? But nevertheless, you can't really pay millions and millions of dollars of gift vouchers without it showing up in some sort of bank account somewhere. In other words, all relevant transactions are known to the banks in full. So it follows that the destination of the stolen trillions, of course, are also known to the banks and the contractors in full as well, right? Nothing has been lost. Okay, it just passed from one hand to another, from one company to another, from one bank account to another. In other words, we can subpoena the data invoking national security because it's now clear that we are dealing with a runaway organized crime network that is threatening real national security everywhere around the world. Okay, so we can subpoena the data invoking that very same national security that the crime cartel was fraudulently invoking all along. In other words, we can unleash full anti-terror legislation, which I'm pleased to say they have made extremely strict. You know, we can unleash all this invoking national security considerations, right? So this is what we should set out to do. Now, regarding the detailed affidavits, and we're almost finished now, I will endeavor to submit a long form of the affidavits by February 2019, okay, which will match the tick box survey so that it's all, you know, nice and homogeneous. So as you're writing the short template, you can already start sketching out the long form. Now, the long form should be written in full sentences with full details, right? And should pretty much back up everything that you have said in the tick box affidavits, but in much more detail, naming names, giving details, giving the evidence. For that, you need to collect the evidence, you need to organize it, you know, sort it and make it presentable. This is a lot of work, but nevertheless, if you do it, it pays. You also should draw up a full list of perpetrators. You know, we need one from each victim by the summer of 2019 to be able to identify the perpetrators and bring them to justice. And I also would like to have lists of murdered and disappeared victims because we need to have murder investigations and find out what exactly has happened to them. We absolutely owe it to these people that we pursue their cases. So my goal is to weaponize this evidence against the criminals, and I would like to convert every single affidavit into real-life convictions. This has to be the goal if we want to recapture our systems. So for this to be possible, the evidence needs to be solid and well presented. Okay, so no random waffling. The affidavits need to be focused, systematic, and well written. No anecdotes, no rambling, just what happened, what was the damage, who was involved, etc. So after winter 2019, this is now the finishing line, getting compensation for the victims, okay? What I would like to say is that you're entitled to tort damages and punitive damages. And in actual fact, punitive damages have to be applied for to de-incentivize these crimes in future, okay? Because, and also keep in mind that this network is fabulously rich. So, you know, you have to make the punitive damages high enough so that it hurts. Otherwise, they will continue committing these crimes. But we have to be aware, and this is something that some, independent observers drew my attention to regarding the child sex abuse cases in the United Kingdom. It seems to be the case that victims who have been compensated appear to get murdered by the intelligence agencies in revenge. So in other words, victims who have been compensated end up dying suddenly. And then don't ask me where the money goes. Probably back to the cartel, right? We have to guard against that. And what I would say is we put in punitive clauses for untimely and unusual death of victims. This is something we just have to do, given that we're dealing with networks of trained assassins. I mean, these people are serial killers, okay? So if they're facing a problem, their answer, their solution will probably be, oh, we need more serial killing, right? They will not suddenly think, oh, we need to do something fundamentally different. They will just do more of what they're doing anyway. That's usually what people end up doing. So in this case, we really need punitive clauses should any of these victims be murdered. We also have to ensure that the compensation is adequate. Each victim is adequately compensated, and for each crime, because while we are being assaulted 24/7, every single crime is a separate burden on you with separate damages. Okay, so you might suffer from hacking and from more gallons and from directed energy weapons, and these three, they are compounded. They are actually making it worse and are pushing you even closer to suicide, or they are destroying your life even more, right? So we can't just say, okay, let's just bundle these and then just it will be fine. No, if we bundle, we'll end up with less compensation. So do not let yourself be bundled with other people necessarily into mass cases, into any sort of, inquiries, any sort of committees, like the bioethics committees. All these things are just used as fronts to get your way from the courts and from the compensation that you're entitled to. So we should also explain to judges that the compensation is a price for these crimes, right? It is a simple law of economics that people respond to incentives. So if the price for crime is too low, it's worth it. It's a bargain crime. It's a bargain. Raping a child, chipping a child, and torturing it until the end of its life, right? If it's too cheap, it's worth it. So it is also the case that it is a form of Illuminati and Masonic mockery to pay these victims an absolute pittance after these victims have been mauled and, nearly killed. And I really want to avoid that. In actual fact, I want to turn it around on anybody, any judge who dares to try to turn, victims into a mockery by not giving adequate compensation. So keep in mind that inadequate compensation is a form of discrimination and a crime in itself. Okay, so should any judge try to pull a fast one on us in this regard, it will be actually a crime in itself. And most importantly, we have to ensure fast compensation, certainly within the lifetime of a victim, and it has to be matched to the victim's immediate needs. In other words, if a victim has been crippled by the brain chip torture, by the non-stop assaults, by the slander campaigns, and by the non-stop terror into homelessness and into unemployment and into constant physical pain, the compensation has to actually match that and has to indemnify these victims against what has been done to them, which means paying fast, paying adequately, pulling people out of homelessness, pulling people out of their pain, and switching off these chips into paying for medical care, and so on and so on. So I personally think that the victims who have been assaulted should have free medical care, you know, forever after, pretty much. So this is it, folks. And I would like to say once more that this is a plan, right? You can improve on it, I'm sure. There are better plans and there are many, many more plans. And of course, depending on where you are on the map, where you are in the landscape of our civil society, you might have access to, I don't know, the military or intel, or maybe even the black nobility and the royals, and you might be able to come up with a different plan to be much more effective in helping us stop these crimes. Whatever you decide to do, what is important is that we all work together and we all help each other to stop this genocide, because none of us can do it on their own. So thank you for listening. I hope this really helps. I will now proceed to work off the plan for 2019 and start, you know, going step by step. And let me know what you think. And please, please, if you could fill out a tick box affidavit and help me. There are court cases coming up in spring. As I said, I will have a court case as well fairly soon, and I really need your support. I really need your help testifying what type of crimes are being committed against us, so that I don't stand in court alone without expert backup, without victims to back me up. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening, and bye for now.